Nice to see you both. Glad we're all reunited
Likewise,
again.
Katie.
Back at you.
So here in Washington, a lot is being said about Canada lately.
Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state, okay? It really should.
Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state.
So when I say they should be a state, I mean that. I really mean that.
We don't need the cars. We don't need their lumber.
It would be a great state. It would be a cherished state.
You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like.
It's just an artificial line that was drawn in the sand or in the ice. You add that to this country, what a beautiful landmass, the most beautiful landmass anywhere in the world. And it was just cut off for whatever reason.
I forgot how specific Donald Trump had been in some of those initial
No kidding.
31st state clips when he made those claims. Hearing that, guys, Paul, Willie, what do you think?
One that wasn't there, I think, is Canada lives because of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That's fresh. That's new.
Yeah, and maybe, yeah. And that hurt. It's because it's like there's an element of truth there because the economy is so crucial to ours. But it's not true. The other one that isn't true that wasn't there was how NATO would never come to the aid of the United States. Well, it did. And Canadian soldiers and soldiers from other countries died because of that. And it makes you question the truth of everything else he says when you listen to them all like that. It is amazing how specific he was, but at the end of the day, part of you wants to just roll your eyes and say, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot. It shows you kind of how often he has thought of Canada, how frequently he has mentioned Canada. And I think, clearly Canada's living rent-free in Donald Trump's brain.
Yeah, it really was intense when Donald Trump first returned to office. And it was time, without prompting, Trump would bring it up time and time again. And it really sort of put a challenge, toward Canada. What about this is serious? What about this needs to be taken extremely seriously? And what about this is he just trying to troll Canadians?
What is truth? What is troll?
Mm-hmm. And figuring out how Canadians should be paying attention because at times there are real threats with real consequences, and then at times there are things he say that Paul, as you sort of say, like what are you talking about? And that seems to be this tricky part. And so today we are going to explore that, and we are asking the question: can Canada stop taking the bait, if you will? I'm Katie Simpson.
I'm Paul Hunter.
And I'm Willy Lowry. And this is 2 blocks from the White House, which just so happens to be where we're sitting and the name of the podcast.
So another week, another terror threat from U.S. President Donald Trump. Willie, I want to start with you. Walk us through what this latest threat is when it comes to aircraft in Canada. Bring us up to speed.
Sure. So Thursday night, Trump takes to social media, as he so often does, and blasts out this message essentially threatening 50% tariffs on Canadian-made aircrafts if the Canadian government doesn't certify a range of Gulfstream planes. But the thing is, half of the planes that he wanted certified have already been certified. And according to Transport Canada, the rest are in the process. But he also threatens to decertify Bombardier planes as well. This is a threat he's made in the past to Bombardier. In his first term, he slapped, I think, 300% tariffs on them, on their C-Series. So clearly he has some sort of issue with Bombardier. And again, it kind of came out of nowhere. And then you have the Canadian government, Bombardier, basically scrambling and looking for ways to de-escalate the situation. I know that Bombardier stocks took a hit. So again, a situation that's kind of left people thinking, what? Why?
And does Trump even have sort of the authority to kind of go down this path?
So that's the big question. You would think it's an FAA decision to make, but according to the White House, it ultimately falls under the jurisdiction of the Department of Transport, which falls under Trump. But then here's another caveat. It would only apply to new planes, so not to the existing aircrafts that have already been certified under the FAA and are flying across the U.S., which there are, I believe, hundreds, if not thousands, of Canadian-made planes working and operating in the U.S. at the moment.
But this is the problem with Trump trolling, right? Like, nobody knows what to make of it, right? In the old days, when the president says something, the understanding is much consideration has been given to what the president is saying, and they've done the research, and they've done the thought, and they've done the thinking, they've thought about policy, and they've thought of where the U.S. wants to go with these things. Now, it certainly has the feel of the president of the United States just saying whatever comes into his mind because something is irritating him or annoying him, or he's heard something from Mark Carney or something like that has peeved him off. Being careful with my words here.
Look how polite you are there, Paul. I support that.
So Canadian, right? But so you mentioned the stock goes down, and it's come up for Bombardier, right? But it's gone up again. Rich people are wondering, who use a lot of these jets that are made that Trump is talking about, are wondering, well, what's going on? Even though nobody knows where it's going, it's the idea that this might happen, that maybe somehow he can declare it a national security issue, and thus that gives him the power to override the FAA. Nobody knows. This gets to the heart of Trump's trolling. It confuses everybody.
I also feel for the White House staffer who had to spend 12
Exactly.
hours figuring out, wait, does he have the authority to do this? And wait, what is he talking about?
Didn't you wrote to the White House?
I did. And, the delay in response suggests they were trying to figure it out.
I was going to say, this sort of gets to the heart of the question here. And when something is posted by the U.S. president in this moment, how seriously does Canada have to take it? And it sort of gets to that point. But Willy, the Canadian military has plans to buy F-35 aircraft from an American company. But those plans are under review. What might that have to do with any of this?
I mean, I don't know how much that factored into his tariff threats, but it's certainly all part of the narrative that's going on right now between the U.S. and Canada. I mean, Canada has a big decision to make, right? It is on the hook for at least 16 of these F-35 aircrafts, and for a total of 88, it's already paid for 16, but it's got a decision to make whether it wants to buy the remainder of its order or switch to the Saab Gripen, Swedish-made plane. And, if you're the Canadian government, you have to be thinking, do I follow through and buy from a country that we've, essentially integrated our entire military system with, but that just so happens to be threatening our very existence? Or do I try and branch out and buy from Europe and kind of essentially broadening and strengthening and diversifying our military equipment? It's a tough decision, right? And it also, you can only imagine the reaction that Trump will have if and when Canada decides to buy the Gripen over the F-35s. It's not going to go over well.
I would say a further complicating factor is that, look, the reality is we have an aging fleet of fighter jets, right? And we've been talking about this for many years, right? A rational, reasoned decision was made by the Canadian government that these are the F-35s are the best jets for our military. And now, potentially for political reasons, we change our mind. And so is that a good thing? Potentially. We don't know what's going to happen. But is that a good thing for the military? That's why it's a complicated decision. Do you do something because you want to diversify? Because you want to... We see the ruptured relationship we now have with the United States, which is real, right? But now we make this decision based on that, after having made a decision to go with the F-35s because they're the best jets in Canada's assessment.
But I would argue that decision was made, of course, prior to this, and with the thinking of NORAD, where the interconnectivity of the U.S. and Canadian militaries are essential, right? But is that changing? So is it still the best jet for Canada?
And one thing, to take a step back, this is a conversation we are having about, planes, jets, and just one threat. This is just one of the threats that Donald Trump has made toward Canada. It's threat after threat after threat after threat, and it's finding it's Canada and Canadians finding the space as to, okay, how do we navigate what's real here and what is going to come with consequences that affect our daily lives, and how do we take a step back and recognize, okay, this is not something that we actually need to brace for? It is an element to how Trump governs. And it's not just Canada that's dealing with it. I would argue that Canada deals with it the worst right now, even though, he's making threats about Greenland, he's making threats about NATO, he's making all these kinds of threats. But Canada has sort of been the test case in all of this because Canada, Mexico, and China were sort of the first to get threatened with tariffs right out of the gate. But at the same time, we've seen a pattern from Trump where he doesn't necessarily go through with what he's threatening. And it's even led to a phrase that was coined by a journalist who covers Wall Street, and it's taco, Paul. Tell us about Trump tacos.
Katie, we live in Washington, D.C. Tacos are what we have for lunch. Taco, T-A-C-O, right? Trump always chickens out. Because, back to what we were saying earlier, you never know what Trump really means or what he really wants or what his bottom line really is. So taco is meant to be derisive, right? It's meant to say Trump makes these threats, but they're empty, they're hollow threats because he doesn't actually 100% follow through on them. But I argue there's another way to look at it, that if you read The Art of the Deal, right? If you read what Trump has said in the past, that what you do is you demand. I've been following the potential Artemis launch for the past few days, so I'll use a space analogy. You demand the stars, because what you really want is the moon, right? So Trump goes crazy with the demands, and it looks like he's chickening out, but he doesn't want that in the first place. If he gets it, that's great, I think he would say. Mm-hmm. But if he ends up with instead of the stars, he ends up with the moon. I got the moon, right? And that's always been his MO. So I think taco is actually really just underlines the way he operates.
And I think it sort of also hit at some of the way we've seen the markets and investors respond, particularly when it came to tariffs, when Trump was going to go ahead with his initial sort of blanket tariff, what he called the reciprocal tariff plan, where he was going to, name rates for basically every single trading partner that America has. And there had been, expectation that markets would tank and that markets would be in this very difficult position. But investors have found a way to navigate the storm, and we see record high after record high, and Trump points to that as sort of a success. And part of the taco thing has to do with American investors or investors at large anticipating and navigating that, Trump can put these things down and put them on paper, but maybe, when it's time to pull the trigger, he doesn't pull the trigger. Or maybe it's just a little bit, he walks it back a little bit.
Not that uncertainty is a positive.
No,
right.
No, it's not. Yeah. It's not.
And I wondered how much of it is kind of reliant on the historical place of the U.S. as a place of strength, as a place of economic movement and empowerment, and at some point that he's eroding that, right? And so, does that ever kind of dry up?
I think the biggest stick that Trump has to wave about is the resilience of the U.S. economy and the power of the U.S. economy,
Absolutely.
And that plays into everything we've been talking about when you get right down to it, and he knows it. And that's the problem for Mark Carney. That's the problem for every other leader of any other country around the world when dealing with this thing called Trump, right? Is he's got that behind him, and everyone knows it.
And everyone wants access to it. Everyone wants to sell everything they can.
Especially 77% of Canadian exports, I think, are directly with the United States. I mean, by proximity, et cetera, we're right there. We're at the front of that line, right? Yep. And Canada needs that market. We've been reliant on the United States. Canada has been, and that is changing. That has changed. It's a challenge.
Yeah, he negotiates from a place of strength pretty much every single time.
Absolutely. Now, since Trump's return to the White House, there have been a lot of things said about Canada, some of them very serious threats that actually have consequences attached to them. Some of it just openly seems like trolling. So, for example, the other day, the president was asked about how the UK was making a deal with China, and he, without prompting, brought up Canada.
It's even more dangerous, I think, for Canada to get into business with China. Canada is not doing well. They're doing very poorly, and you can't look at China as the answer. I know China very well. I know President Xi's a friend of mine. I know him very well, but that's a big hurdle to go over when you get Canada. The first thing they're going to do is say you're not allowed to play ice hockey anymore. That's not good. Canada's not going to like that.
So, Willy, do you really think that Canadian ice hockey is under threat right now?
My first answer is I don't know what ice hockey is. I play hockey. And, the second is, I think he's doing this really for effect, right? He kind of had a bit of a snicker when he mentioned this. He said it again the next day. Clearly, he kind of likes the line and is kind of trying it out. So, no, I do not think hockey or ice hockey is under threat.
As some would call it.
How much truth or seriousness was there or intended by him, it's hard to know. But I think clearly the fact that the question was about the UK shows that Canada is on his mind. Clearly, the fallout of Mark Carney's speech in Davos still kind of working around in his mind.
Paul, when Trump first returned to office, quite frequently, as we've sort of discussed here, 51st state came up, 51st state. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, given the way that Trump's language around, say, Greenland, do you think there's a new edge to the threats against Canada because of the way he talks about the Western Hemisphere?
I don't know.
Fair enough.
And that's it for today's podcast.
Turning to sports. The problem with trolling, if the theme of the day is trolling, the problem with trolling is you don't know what to make of it ever. Mm-hmm. Like I sat through more than enough times where Barack Obama made jokes about Canada getting milk in bags and stuff like that. And it was meant as a funny thing, mm-hmm. right? And it was taken as a funny thing. And, when Trump smirks after saying something, is that because it's meant to be a funny thing? Or with Trump, it certainly feels like there is more of an edge to it. When Scott Bessent, Secretary of the Treasury, mm-hmm. Made that remark not long ago about how, what was it, that don't pick a fight. Mm-hmm. Mark Carney shouldn't pick a fight in the lead up to the CUSMA renegotiations. Well, he is the Secretary of the Treasury, the equivalent of the finance minister, right? And he has Trump's ear. And what he says, therefore, like with the president himself, the words that come out of his mouth matter. But then, he didn't smirk, but he did say, that's the headline, right? But Bessent also went on to say, things will end up in a good place. Mm-hmm. But you're still left, even when that is said, should you believe that, right? Go back to the negotiations last time around. Trump came out on the day that he was signing, right? And he said, best deal ever, mm-hmm. greatest, historic, right? And now Trump says of Canada, nasty negotiators. Mm-hmm. Posturing, the stuff that is normally behind closed doors in other rooms, maybe. But it all comes back to he is the president. That's the problem with everything we've been talking about. He is the president of the United States, and his words ultimately, potentially, matter.
Willie, tell us, when someone like, Scott Bessent, even though we know at the end of the day that Donald Trump is the decision maker here, but when someone like Scott Bessent sort of sends that message and starts talking about Canada in that way, what kind of weight is behind his words?
Yeah, I think a lot. First of all, to the milk and plastic bag references, never fun when a bad cut ruins the whole family's milk. And I apologize to my siblings and parents. Wasted a lot of good milk, but
well, it's hard. It's
hard.
Not easy.
I know.
You got to have sharp scissors.
What self-respecting parents are letting a 5-year-old cut the milk bag?
Don't run.
But anyways, I think back to Paul's point. Everything these people say matters because these are people of importance, and they are running the most powerful country in the world. And I think all of this is in the backdrop of your territory, which is the upcoming, looming CUSMA negotiations. And I think all of this is kind of the beginning of a chess game or a checkers game. I don't know what sport what board game they're playing, but it's all leading up to July, is it?
Yeah, it's the game of life and everyone is losing.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's rough. I think going into it's the July 1st deadline. I would not be surprised, and I think that Canadians should sort of brace themselves if Donald Trump puts himself out there and postures and sort of signals that he does want to formally end CUSMA or USMCA, as it's called here in the United States. He is going to push for massive concessions from both Canada and Mexico. I expect the trolling and the threats are going to intensify in the next, 6 months.
Yeah, I think this is only the beginning. And I think, to borrow an adage from the UK, I think the only rational approach Canadians can take is keep calm and carry on, because the rhetoric it's going to get ugly. It got ugly, if I recall, the last time round too. It was those were tense negotiations, and they were on a better footing, So I think, again, keep calm and carry on, and do your best to acknowledge what the president is saying, but not necessarily kind of let them tear you apart.
Close your eyes and think of maple syrup.
Liquid gold. Liquid gold.
I will say one of... Take a breath. I'd say one other thing. And I've heard from multiple people over the course of time who've been in rooms where these things are talked about. And one of the things that has historically happened is stuff is said there, and you say, you're going to hear, I've got politics at home. You're going to see some quotes from me and some headlines about how it's going to sound like tough talk or something, but we're moving forward here, and let's just keep things moving forward. Well, those rules don't apply now, right? If you say something in a room with Donald Trump, he could well social it out.
He'll picture the tweet.
He'll picture the tweet, exactly. Yeah. There are multiple people who felt that pain, right? And that is another complication. It's like nothing is off the record anymore. Everything is fair game in Trump's view.
So I think this brings us to our final question, and that is, Paul, Willy, are Canadians reading too much into Donald Trump's posts and his social media activity? Is there a point where we should stop, taking the bait? Is that what it is? Or does everything he say, does it have to be taken extremely seriously?
I'm going after Paul.
Paul?
I don't know. Willy? But I don't know is a sort of accurate answer. And if this doesn't answer the question, but if it's, there may be some consolation in that the whole world is trying to figure this out, and Canada is not alone in being trolled by Trump. Nobody knows what to make of this, how seriously to take his words. Everybody is trying to diversify and re-engage or engage with other countries instead of the United States. People, including Canada, are doing what they can, but nobody knows where this goes. And that is the overarching problem on all of it. How serious is he? Should we take his words seriously? What does he mean? What is his end game? That's the problem. Nobody can figure that out.
And I would say that, even though this trolling is happening to several countries, often simultaneously, it's at the same time very isolating. I think it kind of goes back to what Carney was getting at in his speech. These middle powers unite, but that's relying on other countries rallying around Canada or European nations. And that's not necessarily what's going to happen, right? This still remains the largest, most powerful country in the world. And, it's kind of like, if it's Canada's problem, maybe it's not my problem. Ultimately, that's not the right reaction, I don't think, but it's a natural one. So I don't know. It's a tough one, but I go back to the British adage, keep calm and carry on, pay attention to what's happening here for sure, because it matters, but don't necessarily assume that everything he says will come to fruition.
I was going to modernize that and say don't freak out. I think that's the real
I like
thing
that.
here. Don't freak out. That's our poster, exactly. Because stuff is going to be said. If you freak out, you lose. Mm-hmm. If you take it uber seriously, like literally,
you lose.
Yeah. Exactly. If you do Trump's bidding, you lose, right? It gets complicated.
Yeah. And I would say you go to sleep the way I go to sleep, hoping that he does not tweet about Canada.
Hopefully we've given our listeners something to think about the next time they see a threat from Donald Trump or any members of his administration. But before we go, we did get a question from a listener after last week's episode, and I want to throw it out to both of you. Last week, I was in Minneapolis reporting on the tensions there after 2 Americans were killed by ICE agents and the broad opposition to the ongoing surge in immigration enforcement officers there that's been going on since December. Cynthia D. Carey wrote this comment on Spotify. It says, Whenever I hear about you being on location, I worry. My question is, do you feel safe in the USA, especially when on location, but also in Washington?
Willie?
Generally speaking, yes. Listen, I think most American cities have kind of an edge to them that we don't really have in Canadian cities, but by and large, I still feel safe on the streets.
I don't disagree. I was thinking about that question. I saw the question earlier, Katie, and I mean, truth. The only place in my career where have I felt there was a risk to my personal well-being? Afghanistan, the Gaza Strip, Haiti, and the United States. But the broad answer to the question, and that was during the riots in Washington
in 2020,
Black Lives Matter. Cameraman was hit. Yeah. It was a scary night in D.C. But broadly speaking, the answer is I feel fine.
Yeah.
I mean, even you see, one worries about the normalization of certain things, right? The National Guard soldiers, people ask about that all the time on the streets of D.C. It's all fine. I mean, I personally do not, but I'm not a demonstrator in Minneapolis, and I'm not a person of color who has ended up in this country and waiting for my papers. But I do think it's an overstatement to say people should be fearful down here, because it is still, having said everything we've said today, it's still the United States of America, and it is not. Think beyond the headlines, I guess, is really where I'm going.
Yeah. I generally don't feel unsafe when I'm here. I agree with both of you. This is going to probably be an answer that sort of surprises Canadians who are listening to this. Sometimes in my career reporting on politics in Canada, I have felt far more unsafe in certain situations in Canada because I've been accosted on a number of occasions that people get up in my space. I'm easily identifiable. No one else on Canadian TV looks like me, so you can point me out of a crowd pretty quickly. And there have been circumstances and incidents where people get up in my face and make accusations that are not based in fact. I've had a few of those experiences. It's not the overwhelming majority, but it's happened enough that when I'm in Canada, sometimes I get sometimes nervous in public.
I will just add to Cynthia D. Carey, who wrote, it's a good question.
It is.
There's no, having said what we've all said, right? I mean, there's no denying that emotions are very high in this country.
Yes.
And they're high in Canada, in places and at times as well, as you described, Katie. And the difficulty when emotions are high is that things can happen. And they can happen fast, and they can happen right where you are, and you don't expect it until it happens. And that's the scary thing. I'll say one last thing, if you don't mind. I have found historically here, now and prior to this latest sort of period, the Canadian flag is a great brand. And I have people come up and they'll say, can we do an interview about something? And I'll say to them, and they'll say, well, who are you with? CNN or Fox, right? And I'll say, well, I'm from Canada. And
it's a completely different.
Just the shoulders go down, and it's like, okay, what do you want to know? I'm glad they think we've all come down. Until I say, well, I live in Washington, but it's like it's a great brand to this day, and that helps a lot.
Hopefully, the brand gets stronger at the Olympics.
We'll see about that. Are we allowed to talk about the Olympics? I think there's rights issues. I don't even think we can say the O word.
Go Canada, go. No, okay.
On that note, I'm glad we're going to cheer for Canada. Thank you very much for the question, and keep sending us questions. We're happy to receive feedback and your questions. Send a note. Ask us anything. You can leave us a comment on Spotify, or you can send an email to WashingtonPod, all one word, at CBC.ca. That is WashingtonPod at CBC.ca. That's it for this week, Paul and Willie. I can't wait to see what we're going to talk about next week. Thanks,
guys. This is fun.